H1. When Earth turned its back, the galaxy finally understood its greatest error. H2. Part 1. The Seat at the Edge of the Table. P. Ambassador Elara Mwangi stood at the center of the largest room ever built by living hands. The Grand Assembly of the Galactic Concord stretched out in every direction like the inside of a hollow moon. 4,000 species filled the curved seats that rose high into the pale blue light above. Some were tall and thin like glass. Others were wide and heavy, their bodies wrapped in shells of bone or metal. Some floated. Some crawled. Some existed as clouds of light that hummed when they spoke. P. Elara was the only human in the room. She had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. 31 years before she was born, the first human ship had crossed into Concord space and made contact. Since that day, Earth had been a provisional member, not a real member, a guest, a species on trial. The Concord had given humanity a list of requirements for full membership. Humans had to prove they were peaceful. They had to share their science. They had to follow galactic trade laws. They had to send their young to alien universities and open their borders to Concord observers. Earth did all of it, every single thing, without complaint. Now Elara stood before the assembly to ask for what had been promised: full membership, a real voice, a seat at the table that was not at the edge. She spoke clearly and without emotion. She listed every requirement Earth had met. She showed records, data, and treaties signed and honored. She reminded the assembly that humanity had sent medical teams to 14 disaster zones across the galaxy, that human engineers had helped build 3 orbital stations for species that could not afford them, that Earth had never once broken a Concord law. When she finished, the chamber was quiet. Then the voting began. The result came fast, too fast. The screen behind her filled with red marks, rejections, one after another, like blood spreading across cloth. A few green marks appeared here and there, but they were swallowed by the red. When the count was done, the number was not even close. Earth's application for full membership had been denied by an overwhelming majority. Elara did not move. She stood still and waited for the formal reason. The High Arbiter of the Kaleran hegemony rose from his seat. His name was Sorvan. He was old, even by Kaleran standards, and his pale silver skin was lined with deep cracks like dried earth. The Kaleran were the most powerful species in the Concord. They had been among the first to build starships, and they never let anyone forget it. Sorvan looked down at Elara with something that was not quite anger and not quite pity. It was the look a man gives a dog that has learned to sit but will never learn to speak. Humanity is a promising species, he said. His voice filled the chamber like slow thunder. But it is premature. Your people are too young, too divided among yourselves, too quick to act and too slow to think. We recommend another century of observation before this application is reconsidered. A century. 100 more years of sitting at the edge of the table. Elara nodded once. She said, "Thank you for your time." Then she turned and walked out. The corridor outside the assembly hall was long and wide, built for species much larger than humans. Elara's footsteps echoed as she walked. Behind her, she heard voices. Alien delegates were leaving the chamber, talking among themselves. They did not bother to speak quietly. "Honestly, I am surprised they even applied," said a Varelian trade minister, his forearms folded across his chest. "They always do this," said a Dravathi commander, her teeth clicking in amusement. "They push and push, like children reaching for a high shelf." Then Elara heard the word, the one the galaxy used for humans when they thought no human was listening. Rekal. It was a Kaleran word. It meant loud children. She had heard it before, in whispered jokes at diplomatic dinners, and in messages that were not meant for human eyes. But hearing it here, in the open, minutes after her people had been denied their dignity, that was different. She kept walking. She did not turn around. The journey back to Earth took 11 days. Alara spent most of it alone in her cabin, writing her report. She did not add emotion to it. She did not describe the laughter or the word. She only wrote the facts. Earth was rejected. The reasons given were not supported by evidence. The real reason was simple and old, and common to every species that had ever lived: fear of what they did not understand. When she arrived on Earth, she presented her report to the United Earth Council. The room was small compared to the Grand Assembly. 42 representatives sat in a circle. They read the report in silence. No one shouted, no one cursed, no one called for war or revenge. These were people who had grown up being told that patience would be rewarded, that if they were good enough, smart enough, quiet enough, the galaxy would accept them. Now they knew the truth. The galaxy was never going to accept them. The door was never going to open. The test had no passing grade. The council voted that night. The decision was unanimous. Resolution 77 was simple. Earth would withdraw from the Galactic Concord. Not with anger, not with threats. It would recall every citizen from every off-world station and colony. It would close its communication relays. It would seal its borders. It would end all trade agreements, scientific exchanges, and joint military operations. No farewell, no protest, just silence. 3 weeks later, the last human diplomatic ship departed from Athenaeum Prime. Alara Mwangi was on board. She stood at the observation window and watched the great ring world grow smaller behind her. She had spent 9 years of her life there, learning alien languages, studying alien customs, trying to make herself and her species worthy of respect. She turned away from the window. Behind her, the galaxy continued as it always had. Delegates argued in the assembly. Trade ships moved between stars. The Kaleran made speeches about order and wisdom. No one held a moment of silence for humanity's departure. No one proposed sending a message of goodwill. The seat at the edge of the table was empty now, and no one in the room even noticed it was gone. On Earth, the borders closed. The communication relays went dark. The sky, which had once been full of signals and voices from 1,000 worlds, became quiet. And in that quiet, something began. H1. When Earth turned its back, the galaxy finally understood its greatest error. H1. Part 2. The Silence That Grew Teeth. H2. 15 years passed. The galaxy moved on, or at least it told itself it did. In the first year after Earth's withdrawal, the jokes were common. Delegates at the Concord Assembly made passing comments about the empty provisional seat. Gone like the humans became a short phrase used across dozens of species. It meant something that disappeared and was not missed. Traders used it when a cheap product left the market. Soldiers used it when a weak ally pulled out of a formation. Everyone laughed. By the 5th year, the laughing had become quieter. By the 10th year, it had stopped. The first sign of trouble came from the Varelian Medical Research Consortium on the station world of Delphis 9. For 6 years, their top scientists had been developing a new antibiotic compound, a medicine that could fight infections across more than 200 species. It was going to be their greatest achievement. But the project depended on biological data that had originally been collected and shared by human researchers during the years of cooperation. Without humans to update and expand those datasets, the research hit a wall. The lead scientist sent a formal request to Earth for the missing information. Earth did not respond. He sent it again, and again. Months passed. The communication relays that once connected Earth to the galactic network were dark and cold. No signal went in, no signal came out. The antibiotic project was quietly shelved. 2 years later, a drug-resistant plague swept through 3 Vorelian colony worlds. 40 million fell sick. The medicine that could have saved them sat unfinished in a laboratory, waiting for data that would never come. No one connected the two events. Not yet. The second sign came from the Jinthari trade lanes. These were among the busiest shipping routes in the quadrant, carrying goods between dozens of species. For years, human patrol ships had helped guard these lanes. Humans were not the strongest fighters in the galaxy, and their ships were not the fastest. But they were creative, unpredictable. Pirates who attacked a Kalaran patrol knew exactly what to expect. The Kalaran followed procedure every time, like a machine. But humans changed their tactics from day to day. They set traps, they bluffed, they did things that made no logical sense, and somehow worked anyway. Pirates learned to avoid lanes where human ships flew. The Concord sent replacements, Dravathi cruisers mostly, crewed by disciplined soldiers who followed their orders perfectly. But the pirates adapted quickly to predictable enemies. Within 3 years, cargo losses on the Jinthari lanes had increased by 400%. Insurance costs rose. Trade slowed. Small colony worlds that depended on those supply lines began to suffer shortages. The Concord sent more ships. It did not help. The pirates had learned something the Concord was slow to understand. Discipline without creativity was just a pattern waiting to be broken. Then came the disaster on Lyresi 4. The Lyresi were a gentle species. They were small, soft-bodied, and lived in vast underground cities built into the roots of ancient mountains. Their homeworld was stable, but their colony on Lyresi 4 was not. The planet was young and angry, full of shifting plates and restless magma. The Lyresi had colonized it anyway, because the soil was rich and their people were many and hungry. When the earthquake came, it was the worst in the colony's history. The underground cities cracked open, tunnels collapsed, water systems broke and flooded the lower levels. Fire rose from below as magma found new paths to the surface. 100,000 Lyresi were trapped. Under the old treaties, Earth's Geological Engineering Corps would have responded within hours. Human engineers were the best in the quadrant at this kind of work. They understood unstable planets because they came from one. Earth itself was a world of earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, and storms. Humans had been digging themselves out of disasters since before they had language. They knew how to think on their feet, how to build solutions from whatever was at hand, how to keep working when the ground was shaking beneath them. But the old treaties were dead. Earth's borders were sealed. The Concord sent its own rescue teams. They were well-trained and well-equipped. They arrived in 19 days. By then, the situation had changed 7 times. New collapses had blocked the routes they had planned to use. Flooding had moved in directions their models had not predicted. The rescue teams followed their procedures, recalculated, sent for updated equipment, and waited for approval from their commanders. While they waited, people died. 40,000 Lyresi were lost. It was the worst disaster in the species' recorded history. Across the galaxy, there was mourning and anger and blame. But no one blamed the humans who were not there. No one said out loud what some had begun to think. That the galaxy had grown used to having humans around to fix things, and that without them, the Concord was slower than it believed. But a group of young diplomats and scientists from 12 different species began working together in secret. They called their project the Human Dependency Index. For 2 years, they went through every system, treaty, technology, and cooperative project in the Concord's records. They tracked every place where human participation had been a factor. Not the main factor, not the official factor, but the quiet, hidden factor that made things work. The list was long. It was so long that when they finished, they sat in silence for a long time, staring at the data on their screens. Humans had not been the strongest species. They had not been the smartest, or the oldest, or the most advanced. But they had been everywhere, doing everything, filling every small crack with their strange energy. They volunteered for missions no one else wanted. They asked questions that seemed foolish until the answers changed everything. They made friends with species that hated each other. They cooked food for strangers and learned songs in languages they could barely pronounce. The galaxy had not noticed what humans did, because humans did it so naturally. Like air. No one thinks about air until it is gone. The young researchers brought their report to the assembly and asked for it to be read into the official record. High Arbiter Sorvan, now very old and very thin, denied the request. He stood before the assembly one final time on this subject and spoke with a voice that shook but did not bend. The galaxy existed for millions of years before humanity crawled out of its gravity well, he said. We have faced threats before. We have lost species before. We do not need loud children to hold our hand in the dark. This matter is closed. The matter was closed. The report was buried. The young researchers were reassigned to minor posts on distant stations. But the problems did not stop. Slowly, quietly, like roots cracking stone, and far away, behind sealed borders, something else was growing too. Observation satellites from neighboring systems began picking up strange readings from Earth's solar system. Massive energy spikes, new structures in orbit, heat signatures that matched no known technology, ships that moved in ways that should not have been possible. Something was being built in there, something big. But Earth's borders held, and the silence continued. And the galaxy told itself that whatever the humans were doing behind their walls, it did not matter. The galaxy had been wrong about humans before. It was about to learn just how wrong it could be. When Earth turned its back, the galaxy finally understood its greatest error. Part 3. What they built in the dark. 30 years after Earth closed its doors, the galaxy found something it could not kill. The astronomers on Rethan Station were the first to see it, a darkness at the edge of known space, far beyond the outermost Concord territories. It was not a cloud. It was not a ship. It was not anything that had a name. It moved slowly at first, like smoke drifting through water, but it was growing. And everything it touched stopped existing. Stars went dark, planets broke apart into dust, and then the dust itself disappeared. Entire systems were swallowed without sound, without light, without any sign that they had ever been there at all. The Concord's best scientists studied it from a distance. They sent probes into the darkness. None came back. They aimed their most powerful sensors at it and received data that made no sense. The anomaly was not destroying matter in any way they understood. It was unmaking it, breaking it down past atoms, past particles, past energy itself, into nothing, as if the universe was being erased one page at a time. They called it the hollow tide. Within a year, the panic began. The hollow tide was not slowing down. It was speeding up. Every piece of matter it consumed made it larger and faster. The Concord's military analysts ran simulations day and night. Every simulation ended the same way. If the hollow tide was not stopped, it would reach the first populated Concord worlds in 6 years. It would consume the entire galaxy in 40. The Concord mobilized everything it had. The Kalerans sent their greatest warships. The Dravathi assembled a fleet of 10,000. The Vorelians built new weapons based on theories that had never been tested. 20 species contributed soldiers, scientists, and resources to the greatest military effort in galactic history. None of it worked. The warships fired on the hollow tide. Their weapons hit it and were absorbed. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, nuclear explosions, the tide swallowed them all and grew stronger. The Dravathi fleet attempted a coordinated strike, hitting the anomaly from every direction at once. The tide shuddered, paused for a moment, and then expanded outward in a sudden wave that destroyed 30 ships in an instant. The scientists tried a different approach. They built containment fields, gravity traps, and dimensional barriers. The hollow tide passed through each one as if it were not there. They tried to redirect it using artificial black holes. The tide consumed the black holes. They tried to poison it with antimatter. The tide absorbed the antimatter and doubled its speed for 3 days. The greatest minds in the galaxy, species that had been building starships for 1,000,000 years, could not even slow it down. Fear spread like fire. Worlds on the outer edges of Concord space began evacuating. Refugees flooded inward. Trade collapsed. The assembly met in emergency session after emergency session, and every meeting ended the same way, with silence and with the hollow tide a little closer than before. It was in the 4th emergency session that a young Kaleran physicist stood up. Her name was Thesara. She was brilliant, and she was afraid, and she was tired of watching her elders pretend that their pride was more important than their survival. "We need the humans," she said. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted. The Kaleran representatives demanded she be removed. Thesara stood her ground, her thin silver hands gripping the edge of the speaking platform. "We have tried everything," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Every weapon, every theory, every strategy that our civilizations have developed over millions of years. And we have failed. There is one species in this galaxy that thinks differently from all of us. One species that solves problems in ways we cannot predict or understand. We sent them away because they made us uncomfortable. Now we are dying, and our comfort does not matter anymore." She was censured. Her academic credentials were suspended. She was ordered to leave the chamber and not return. But as she walked out, she saw something in the eyes of the delegates watching her go. Not anger, fear. And beneath the fear, a terrible, growing agreement. 3 weeks later, the Concord voted to send a diplomatic fleet to Earth. It was the hardest vote the Assembly had ever taken. For 30 years, they had told themselves that humans did not matter, that the galaxy was better without them, that the loud children had gone home and the adults could handle things from here. Now they were crawling to those same children and begging for help. The fleet was large and impressive. 12 warships, 6 diplomatic cruisers, the finest ambassadors from the most powerful species. They arrived at the edge of Earth's sealed border and began broadcasting on every frequency available. "People of Earth," they said, "the Galactic Concord seeks an audience. We come in peace. We come with humility. We come to ask for your help." Earth did not respond. They tried again. They sent the message in every human language they had on record. They offered full membership. They offered reparations. They offered to rename the provisional seat and give humanity a permanent place at the center of the assembly. They promised anything and everything they could think of. Earth did not respond. For 3 weeks, the fleet waited in the cold space outside Earth's border. Military commanders argued about whether to force their way in. Diplomats wrote and rewrote their messages, making them more humble, more desperate, more honest each time. Nothing. The border remained sealed. The relays remained dark. The silence was absolute. Then, on the 22nd day, a single ship appeared. It came from inside the border. A small vessel, unarmed, with no markings, except a simple blue circle on its hull. It stopped in front of the fleet and opened a single communication channel. The face on the screen belonged to a woman the galaxy had never seen before. She had dark hair cut short, and eyes that looked tired in the way that people look tired when they have been working very hard for a very long time. She introduced herself as Director Yuki Tanaka of Earth's Vanguard Initiative. She did not smile. She did not welcome them. She looked at the fleet of powerful alien warships gathered outside her world's door. The same galaxy that had laughed at her species and called them loud children. And she spoke in a voice that was calm and even and completely without fear. Earth has received your messages, she said. We are aware of the hollow tide. We have been tracking it for 11 years. 11 years. The Concord had only discovered it 18 months ago. Earth will hear your request, Tanaka continued. You will send one representative, alone, unarmed, to our surface. You will see what we have built, and then we will decide whether you are worth saving. The channel closed. The small ship turned and disappeared back behind the border. The fleet commanders looked at each other. One representative, alone, on a world they could not scan, behind a border they could not cross, among a species they had insulted and abandoned. It could be a trap. It could be a humiliation. It could be anything. The Concord chose the Thesara. She was not a diplomat. She was not a soldier. She was a young physicist who had been stripped of her credentials for saying out loud what everyone was thinking. But she was the only one who had spoken humanity's name with respect, and perhaps that mattered. Thesara boarded a small shuttle and flew alone through the gap in Earth's border. She passed through layers of energy fields that her instruments could not identify. She entered Earth's atmosphere and looked down through the clouds at the planet below. Her breath stopped in her chest. Her hands gripped the edges of her seat. Her instruments screamed with readings that should not have been possible. She whispered a single word in Kalorin. It had no direct translation, but it meant something close to, "What have they done?" Below her, Earth burned with light. When Earth turned its back, the galaxy finally understood its greatest error. Part 4. Prometheus Unchained. Thesara's shuttle descended through clouds that shimmered with faint golden light. The light was not natural. It came from a web of thin energy lines woven through the atmosphere itself, a planetary shield so advanced that it used the sky as its structure. Her instruments tried to read it and failed. They were not broken. They simply did not have categories for what they were seeing. Below the clouds, Earth spread out in every direction, and it was not the world the Concord remembered. The cities were different. They were not bigger. If anything, they were smaller than she expected. But they moved. Buildings shifted slowly, rearranging themselves like living things, adjusting to the movement of the sun and the wind. Green covered everything. Forests grew on rooftops. Rivers ran through the centers of streets. The line between nature and technology had been erased so completely that Thesara could not tell where one ended and the other began. And above the planet, in orbit, the real shock waited. Thousands of structures hung in space around Earth. Stations, shipyards, energy collectors, and things Thesara had no words for. Some were enormous, larger than anything the Concord had ever built. Others were small and moved in swarms like schools of fish. At the center of it all, a fleet of ships sat in formation. They were sleek and dark and shaped like nothing she had seen in any database. And at the heart of the fleet, one ship dwarfed all the others. It was called the Resolve, and it was the size of a small moon. Thesara's shuttle landed on a platform outside a low building surrounded by water and trees. Director Yuki Tanaka was waiting for her, standing in simple clothes with her hands at her sides. Beside her stood an older woman, much older, her dark skin lined with age, her white hair pulled back, her back straight despite the years. Thesara recognized her from the historical records. Ambassador Ilara Mwangi, the woman who had stood before the assembly 30 years ago and been told to wait another century. "Welcome to Earth," Tanaka said. Her voice was polite, but not warm. "We have a lot to show you. Try to keep up." What followed was the longest day of Thesara's life. They showed her the energy systems first. The Concord used fusion reactors, powerful, reliable, the standard technology for advanced civilizations. Earth had moved past fusion 20 years ago. They had cracked zero-point energy extraction, pulling power directly from the fabric of space itself. The Kaloran Science Council had officially declared this impossible. They had published papers proving it could not be done. Earth had done it anyway. How? Thesara asked, staring at the reactor. A quiet, humming sphere no larger than a room. We stopped reading your papers, said the engineer, giving the tour, and he was not joking. They showed her the medical facilities next. During the years of Concord membership, human lifespan had been around 80 years, short by galactic standards. The Kaloran lived for thousands of years, and had always used this as evidence of human inferiority. Now, through genetic work that Thesara could barely follow, humans lived to 300, not by replacing parts or uploading minds into machines, as other species had tried. They had done it by unlocking things that had always been inside human biology. Dormant systems, unused potential, doors that evolution had closed, and that human science had opened again. Disease was gone. Not managed, not treated, gone. The Concord used quantum processors. Fast, efficient, the best that physics allowed. Earth had built something else entirely. They called them neural cores, living processors grown from biological tissue, part machine and part mind. They did not just calculate, they understood. They made leaps of logic that no conventional computer could make. They dreamed solutions to problems that had not been asked yet. This is impossible, Thesara said for the fourth time. You keep using that word, Tanaka said. I do not think it means what you think it means. They showed her the defense grid. Thesara was a physicist, not a soldier, but even she understood what she was looking at. The orbital weapons platforms around Earth could focus enough energy to crack a planet. The defense shields could withstand the combined firepower of every fleet in the Concord. It had built a wall that nothing in the known galaxy could break through. Did you build all of this because of us? Thesara asked. Because of what the Concord did to you? It was Ilara who answered. The old ambassador had been quiet throughout the tour, walking slowly, watching Thesara's reactions with calm, dark eyes. Now she spoke, and her voice was soft, but carried the weight of 30 years. We did not build this out of anger, Ilara said. We built it because you taught us something important. You taught us that no one was coming to help, that the galaxy would watch us struggle and call it natural selection, that we would always be the loud children, no matter how quietly we spoke or how much we gave. So we stopped waiting for your approval. We stopped following your rules, and we became something that does not need saving. Thesara felt something cold move through her chest. It was not fear. It was shame. Can you stop it? Tanaka and Ilara looked at each other. Something passed between them. A conversation without words. The kind that only happens between people who have worked together for a very long time. We have been studying the hollowed tide for 11 years, Tanaka said. We understand it better than the Concord does. We believe we can stop it. But we need you to understand something first. She stepped closer to Thesara. Her eyes were steady and hard and tired. We are not doing this for the Concord, she said. We are not doing this to prove ourselves. We are not doing this because we want your seat or your approval or your apology. We are doing this because there are billions of living beings in this galaxy who will die if someone does not act. And humanity has never been able to watch people die and do nothing. Even when those people laughed at us. Even when they called us children. That is who we have always been. Thesara nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. Go back to your Concord, Tanaka said. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them we are coming, and tell them to stay out of our way. That night, Thesara sat in her shuttle and recorded her report. She transmitted everything. The energy systems, the medical breakthroughs, the fleet, the weapons, all of it. She sent it directly to the Concord Assembly, unfiltered and unedited. The reaction was immediate. The assembly chamber fell into silence so deep that the environmental systems could be heard humming in the walls. 4,000 species stared at the data on their screens and tried to understand what they were seeing. The species they had dismissed, the species they had mocked, the species they had locked out of the room and forgotten about. That species had surpassed every single one of them. In his private chambers, High Arbiter Sorvan watched the report alone. He watched it twice. His thin silver hands trembled. He looked at the fleet that humanity had built, the ships, the weapons, the technology that his own people had sworn was impossible, and for the first time in his long, proud life, he understood what he had done. He had not rejected a young species. He had caged a giant and told it that it was small. And when the cage opened, the giant had grown beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Sorvan stood slowly. He reached up and removed the sigil of office from his chest, the golden mark that identified him as the highest authority among the Kaloran. He placed it on the table. Then he walked out of his chambers, down the long corridor, and disappeared into the crowds of Athenaeum Prime. No one saw him again. Across the galaxy, on 100,000 worlds, billions of beings looked up at their skies and waited, and from the direction of a small sealed solar system, a light began to grow. The Vanguard fleet was moving. 10,000 human ships carrying technology the galaxy could not understand, crewed by a species the galaxy had thrown away. They were coming, not for revenge, not for glory, because someone needed help. And that had always been enough. When Earth turned its back, the galaxy finally understood its greatest error. Part 5, The Debt That Cannot Be Named. The Vanguard fleet arrived at the edge of the hollow tide on a day that the galaxy would remember forever. The Concorde's combined forces were already there. Thousands of ships from dozens of species, arranged in defensive formations that stretched across light years. They had been fighting and failing for months. Their weapons left no mark on the darkness. Their shields crumbled like paper. Every day the hollow tide grew larger, and every day more stars disappeared from the sky. Then the human ships came. They moved differently from anything the Concorde had ever seen. They did not fly in rigid formations. They flowed, shifting and adjusting to each other, like birds in flight, like water moving around stone. Their hulls were dark and smooth, and reflected no light. At the center of the fleet, the Resolve hung in space like a black mountain, silent and vast. Director Tanaka's voice came across every open channel in the region. It was calm. It was clear. It carried no pride and no fear. Concorde forces, this is Earth's Vanguard fleet. We are taking position. Do not engage the hollow tide. Withdraw to safe distance and observe. We will handle this. There was a pause. Then, one by one, the Concorde ships began to pull back. Some did it quickly, with relief. Others hesitated, their commanders struggling with the shame of stepping aside. But they all moved. The Travathi, the Vorelians, the Jinthari, even the Kaloran warships, crewed by soldiers who had been taught since birth that their species led and others followed, turned their great ships around and withdrew. The Vanguard fleet moved forward alone. Thesara watched from the observation deck of a Kaloran cruiser. She had been given special permission to remain close, as Earth's liaison to the Concorde. She pressed her face against the viewing glass and held her breath. The human ships spread out in a wide arc around the leading edge of the hollow tide. They did not fire. They did not raise shields. Instead, something strange happened. The Resolve opened panels along its entire hull, thousands of them, and from each one, a beam of light extended outward. Not weapon light, not scanning light, something else. Something soft and complex and constantly changing. On the bridge of the Resolve, Tanaka stood, surrounded by screens and neural core interfaces. Around her, hundreds of scientists and engineers worked in focused silence. They had spent 11 years studying the hollow tide from behind Earth's borders. They had watched it grow. They had analyzed every particle it consumed. They had fed every piece of data into the neural cores and asked the living computers not just to calculate, but to understand. And the neural cores had found something that every other civilization had missed. The hollow tide was not a weapon, or rather, it had been a weapon once, millions of years ago, built by a civilization so old that no record of them remained. But the weapon had outlived its makers. It had drifted through empty space for longer than most species had existed, and somewhere in that vast, lonely darkness, something had changed. The destructive pattern at the heart of the hollow tide was not random. It was structured. It repeated. It had variations and rhythms and something that the neural cores, with their ability to feel as well as think, recognized for what it was. It was a voice. The hollow tide was screaming. It had been screaming for millions of years. A last signal from a dead civilization, coded into the only thing they had left, their weapon. A cry for help that had been twisted by time and damage into something that destroyed everything it touched. Not because it wanted to destroy, but because no one had ever answered, and the signal had grown louder and louder and louder until it tore reality apart. Every species that had faced the hollow tide had tried to fight it, to silence it, to kill it, and every attempt had only made it scream louder. Humanity was going to try something different. Tanaka gave the order. Begin protocol empathy. The beams of light from the Resolve changed. They carried something into the heart of the hollow tide. Not energy, not force, but information. And not the kind of information that scientists usually send. Not mathematics, not physics, not logic. Music. The first signal was a simple melody, an old Earth song, the kind that mothers hum to frighten children. It entered the darkness and disappeared. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Resolve sent more. Symphonies that humans had written centuries ago, full of sadness and hope and the ache of being alive. The sound of rain falling on leaves, the laughter of children playing in a park, poetry read in a dozen human languages, words about loss, about loneliness, about the desperate need to be heard. Paintings translated into light, the image of a hand reaching out, the image of a door opening, a voice saying in every language Earth had ever spoken, "We hear you. You are not alone. You can stop now." The galaxy held its breath. The hollow tide shuddered. It was a movement so vast that instruments across the region registered it as a gravitational wave. The darkness at its edges flickered. The constant, grinding process of destruction stuttered and paused. Then, slowly, impossibly, the hollow tide began to contract. It pulled inward like a breath being drawn. The leading edge stopped advancing. Stars that had been moments from destruction were spared. The darkness folded in on itself, growing smaller, tighter, denser, and from within it, something emerged. Not a sound, because there was no air in space, but a signal, a pattern, a response. The neural cores translated it instantly. It was simple. It was old. It was the last thought of a civilization that had died alone in the dark, millions of years ago, coded into a weapon that had been crying out ever since. It said, "Thank you." The hollow tide dissolved, not violently, not with an explosion or a flash of light. It simply faded, like fog burning away in morning sun. The darkness lifted. Stars that had been hidden behind it reappeared, still burning, still alive. Space that had been empty was full again. It was over. Across the galaxy, on every world and station and ship, billions of beings watched and wept. Many of them did not understand why they were weeping. They only knew that something terrible had ended, and something important had been said in the silence. In the days that followed, the Concord held its largest assembly in history. Every species attended. The chamber was full in a way it had not been in living memory. And at the center of the floor, where a provisional seat had once stood empty and forgotten, a full delegation from Earth took its place. The Concord offered Earth everything: leadership of the assembly, command of the combined fleet, a permanent seat at the head of the table. Whatever humanity wanted, the galaxy was ready to give. Alara Mwangi walked to the speaking platform. She was old now. Her steps were slow and careful, but her back was straight. And her voice, when she spoke, filled the chamber the same way it had filled it 30 years ago, when she had stood in this same spot and been told she was not enough. "You ask us what we want," she said. "We want what we have always wanted, to be your neighbors, not your servants, not your saviors, your equals. We do not need your approval anymore, but we would welcome your friendship." She paused. She looked up at the thousands of faces looking down at her, faces of every shape and color, beings of every kind, the whole vast family of the galaxy. "We did not come back because you earned it," she said softly. "We came back because that is what neighbors do." Earth did not join the Concord. The Concord, as it had been, no longer deserved to exist in its old form. Instead, over the following months, a new framework was built. They called it the Galactic Accord. It was founded on a simple idea that the galaxy had taken millions of years to learn. No species sits above another. No voice is louder than the rest. The table has no edge. The Kalarin, humbled and changed, were among the first to sign. In a quiet ceremony that was not broadcast, the Kalarin Language Council officially retired the word recall, loud children. In its place, they entered a new word into Galactic Common Speech. It was an ancient Kalarin root that had not been used in a million years, dusted off and given new life. Terath. It meant those who stayed kind when they had every reason not to. Months later, on a balcony on Athenaeum Prime, Thesara stood beside Director Tanaka and watched the sunset over the great ring world. Below them, in a garden that had been planted as a symbol of the new accord, children were playing. A human girl and a Kaloran boy were chasing each other between the flower beds, laughing in a way that needed no translation. Thesara watched them for a long time. Then she turned to Tanaka. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. When you were behind your walls, building your fleet and your weapons and your technology, when you had the power to do anything, did you ever think about not coming to help us, after everything the galaxy did to you?" Tanaka watched the children. The human girl had fallen down, and the Kaloran boy was helping her up, his small silver hand wrapped around her small brown one. Tanaka smiled. It was the first real smile Thesara had ever seen from her. "Every species thinks about it," Tanaka said quietly. "The ones worth knowing choose to show up anyway." The sun set over Athenaeum Prime. The children laughed. And for the first time in its long, old history, the galaxy was truly, finally, whole.